Hi everyone, Jason here from spiritualbabies.net. You've joined us today for Chapter 4 of Esther. The previous shows can be found by clicking the little question mark that's going to pop up on the top of your screen now. This is part of a playlist, so you can either choose the chapter you want or you can watch the whole thing like Netflix, but without all the ads. Joining us and guiding us through Esther is Rabbi Neely. Thank you for joining us again today.
Thank you for putting this all together.
And we are going to jump right in. Previously on Esther, basically the whole of the known Persian world has been ordered that in around 12 months all the Jews should be slaughtered, and it's each province's job to make sure this happens. The Jews should be destroyed in whatever way is chosen, and it has to happen in one day, and everything they own will be ransacked and taken. Esther, meanwhile, is living as one of the courtesans of King Ahasuerus. Mordecai is still patrolling the palace grounds, and a new player, Haman, is now the second in charge of the king, and has a personal vendetta against Mordecai, which has led him to convince the king that all the Jews have to die. Oh, I'm quite happy with that summation. Right, we'll crack on. Esther 4. When Mordecai learned all that had happened, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went through the city, crying out loudly and bitterly, until he came in front of the palace gate, for one could not enter the palace gate wearing sackcloth. I just want to ask you a little bit about sackcloth and ashes. So that appears a lot in the text, not just in this book, but even in Nineveh, in Jonah. Mm-hmm. When the people repented, they did it in that way. It must have just been part of the wardrobe for showing kind of a repentant spirit.
All right, so you've got the right idea. Now you just have to follow it to the logical conclusion.
So he's walking through town now. Basically, it would be kind of like, I'm not going to name any names, but someone who maybe didn't like President Trump at all, going through a Trump rally, crying with a t-shirt saying, "Why does our president make such bad decisions?"
No, that's not what his t-shirt would say.
Oh, no, okay.
Because what we're talking about here is somebody who, as you already pointed out, seems to be repenting.
Okay.
So the question, to use your analogy and to build off of it, it would be someone going through the crowd wearing a t-shirt saying, "This is our fault."
Ah. Okay.
Right, so now we have to ask, exactly what is it that Mordecai is repenting for?
So
what
feels,
has he done wrong?
Right, he feels that the imminent death of all of his people lays at his feet because he didn't bow.
So that is one interpretation, is that he is personally responsible for this. Mm-hmm. And he realizes that his brinkmanship with Haman has led to this edict. And now he is going to try and find a way out of it. But first he has to admit that he was at least partially responsible, Haman being mostly responsible,
right,
for bringing this about. But there's an alternative explanation, which is that he is saying, we are all responsible, meaning all the Jewish people. And the Midrash points to the fact that the people joined in the idolatry during the Babylonian period. The people also went and frolicked at Ahasuerus' feast, and that there were other misbehaviors that the people had been engaging in prior to this that made them vulnerable to these sorts of accusations and attacks by Haman.
Right. So basically they had acted poorly. So Ahasuerus would maybe more quickly assume that they were not the upright people that they could have been, and therefore Haman's argument would be easier to swallow.
Exactly. And of course that the King of Kings, that God would allow such an edict to take place, also implies that we must have been somewhat deserving of it, at least in Mordecai's mind.
Right. Also, in every province that the king's command and decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and everybody lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maidens and eunuchs came and informed her, the queen was greatly agitated. She sent clothing for Mordecai to wear, so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he refused. So, at this stage, do we know if the maids know that she's Jewish? Because at the beginning there seemed to be some. Right. Okay.
Nobody knows that she's Jewish.
Okay.
But so this is the beginning of the transformation for the character of Esther. Right? She is the character who actually changes in the story, which is why it's the Book of Esther. You always if you ever want to know who the hero of the story is, you have to look for the person with the story arc. With the character change. And Esther is the person who changes. And she changes because right here at the beginning of this chapter, we see her as still solving problems the way that she has solved problems, which is just do what people want you to do, and they'll like you. That's all you have to do. Just wear what everybody else is wearing or what the eunuchs tell you to wear. Just be pretty, smile, and you'll find favor in the eyes of everyone, and then all the conflicts will go away. And so that's her solution at the start of this chapter. Is she's still thinking in that mindset. And so she sends him clothes as if clothes are the problem. Oh, you're worried about the impending Holocaust? Well, at least have these nice new clothes. What? I'm not wearing the clothes, and that's making me sad. I am sad, and that's why I'm wearing the clothes. So the new clothes are not going to fix anything, my young lady.
So she
but don't worry, she is going to change and have a very different attitude by the end of this chapter and a very different attitude by the end of the book.
So it feels almost as if she didn't include herself as a possible target.
Which is going to come back in their little exchange of notes very soon.
Okay. Thereupon Esther summoned Hatak, one of the eunuchs whom the king had appointed to serve her, and sent him to Mordecai to learn the why and wherefore of it all. Hatak went out to Mordecai in the city square in front of the palace gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and about the money that Haman had offered to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. So clearly Mordecai has the full backstory here and knows what went on with Haman and his part in this and the money and everything else. He also gave him the written text of the law that had been proclaimed in Shushan for their destruction. He bade him. Now, I've got that in brackets. So does that mean it wasn't in the original text and it's been put in there to make it easy to read?
Exactly.
Right. He bade him show it to Esther and inform her and charge her to go to the king and to appeal to him and to plead with him for the people. When Hatak came and delivered Mordecai's message to Esther, Esther told Hatak to take back to Mordecai the following reply. Is there anything we need to talk about in those few lines, or should I carry on?
Well, I think we need to point out, what is Mordechai's plan, right? Mordechai's plan is not, we need to pray harder. That tshuva has already begun, but his plan now is Esther needs to go to the king and explain that this needs to stop, right? She needs to go and make a direct appeal to the king. And that sounds like a very simple plan. And indeed, if we were living in a modern European style country with a constitutional monarch or even a total monarch, the queen going to talk to the king about an important issue is absolutely normal. Not in this case, which is what Esther is going to explain in verse 11.
All the king's courtiers and the people of the king's provinces know that if any person, man or woman, enters the king's presence in the inner court without having been summoned, there is but one law for him, that he be put to death. Only if the king extends the golden scepter to him may he live. Now I have not been summoned to visit the king for the last 30 days.
Right, so here we are in the middle of the conflict, and Esther's like, well, I'd love to go and talk to the king, but I can't go unless he asks me to come and talk to him. So that's not really going to work. And it's been like a month since he's even talked to me. So, yeah, can't help you. Right? Because if she goes and he decides that he doesn't really want to see her right then and is upset about her presumptuousness of just coming into the inner court without permission, then she'll die. She's like, I can't risk my life. So there is still this transition point of she's going, I'd be happy to talk to the king, but not at the risk of my life.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound like a meanie, but it sounds almost like, on the one hand, all the Jews are going to die, and then on the other hand, Esther doesn't want to risk her. She doesn't even she's not even looking for other options. She's not, I see what I can do. Maybe I can get one of the other eunuchs to drop a couple of hints. Maybe maybe the king will be like, I haven't seen Esther for a while. There's no option there other than I can't do it, because if I do, I might die. But she's going to die anyway. I mean, this is where that's...
Well, no, she's not. At the moment, remember, her identity is hidden.
Oh,
no one knows it but her.
She's hidden, she's the Clark Kent in the office. No one knows her secret identity.
Right. She is perfectly safe in the palace. At least that's how she feels. I mean, it may not be the best situation because, being forced to marry some guy that you didn't want to be with is never a good thing, to say the least. But being murdered along with all the other, tens of thousands of people of your nation, that sounds even worse to many people. And Esther seems to be one of those who says, I feel really bad for you guys and your impending doom, but I'm not going to risk my neck on a maybe to do this. I mean, she might be implying that, just give it time and maybe eventually the king will call for me and then I can talk to him then. But Mordecai is not having any of that.
Okay. When Mordecai was told what Esther had said, Mordecai had this message delivered to Esther. Do not imagine that you, of all the Jews, will escape with your life by being in the king's palace. Now, it's kind of, do not imagine that you will escape, but why of all the Jews? Is there a reason that he seems to be singling her out?
Well, he's singling her out because she seems to think that out of all the Jews, she'll be the only one left without having to worry about this. So it's not like you of all Jews in the English idiomatic sense, where you would say like you of all people should know blah, 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 blah. It's more like if all of us are going to die, don't think you won't also.
On the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows, perhaps you will have attained a royal position for just such a crisis. So he's very faithful, right? I mean, it sounds like he's absolutely sure that this won't happen. He totally believes in God's promise to protect the Jews, so much so that her refusal, he sees, might result in punishment, and that, as I think we spoke about at the beginning, she was in this position explicitly. I think at the beginning of chapter 3 we mentioned that she was kind of the answer to a problem which hadn't fully been worked out yet.
Exactly. And so, this is this verse 14 is really the turning point of the entire book, where we begin to see a theology at work within what has up to this point been just a court drama. And all of a sudden, we're really introducing this notion that there is something at work in this story beyond just the personality conflicts of all the characters. And Mordecai says it so clearly that I know we will be saved, but it seems just a little too convenient that you're in a position to save us when this disaster begins for me to believe that's entirely coincidental. And I have to believe that if that's been set up, that God will indeed save us. And it does seem like it should be you, but you know what? If not, then I would imagine that if you've abandoned your people, that God will abandon you as well. And bye. we'll get saved some other way, but you won't be.
I seem to remember, and I could be wrong, that Esther's the only book in the Tanakh which doesn't directly mention God.
Correct.
And it's actually a very human story about humans' relationships with God and human faith, in that he's not kind of called on by people. There's just an assumption, Mordecai's trust and faith in God, and I assume Esther's, judging from the next bit, it seems much more kind of tangible. Usually there's a two-way discussion between the protagonist of the story and God will say, don't worry, everything's going to be all right. But we don't get that promise in this. We just get an understanding of how God is out there to look out for the Jews.
And that is up to us to understand, right? That we can't expect a giant flashing neon sign in the sky saying God is with you. That we have to understand that even when we don't hear the voice of God like Moses did. And that is why specifically this book and the holiday is framed as from Nisan to Adar, from the first month to the last month. The first month, of course, being the month of Pesach, of Passover, where God's presence was undeniable even to Pharaoh, and Adar, where God's presence is absolutely deniable to everyone, unless you want to believe that God is participating in the story. And that reversal is where most of human history is going to exist. Most of human history will always be in a state where if you want to deny God's presence and participation in the flow of history, you are absolutely justified in doing so because there is no incontrovertible evidence. You know, despite the fact that I may believe it completely, that doesn't mean that I don't recognize that someone else looking at it without that sense of faith and belief can find their own explanations for every bizarre thing that has happened that has allowed the Jewish people to continue to survive and enjoy many, many good years of life. I know that it's possible to deny that. And that's kind of what Mordecai is pointing out here. That, it's possible. And if you want to believe that you're in the palace just because of like total dumb luck or bad luck, fine. But I believe that there is a God, and God is going to make this work. And I believe if you don't want to be part of God's plan, given where you sit right now, you will be held accountable for that.
Okay. Then Esther sent back this answer to Mordecai. Go, assemble all the Jews who live in Shushan and fast in my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day, and I and my maidens will observe the same fast. Then I shall go to the king, though it is contrary to the law. And if I am to perish, I shall perish. So
right, which is even more powerful in the Hebrew, right? Avadati, avadati, right? If I am lost, if I am, destroyed, then I am destroyed.
So Mordecai went about the city and did just as Esther had commanded him. My circumference kind of my understanding of fasting comes from lots of different places, and there's particularly in kind of evangelical Christianity, I seem to remember that people sometimes fasted for a day or 2 days or 3 days because they felt that their prayers would be stronger, God's ears would be bigger, their voice would be louder. I don't want to pair the two things up, but is that something that's happening here? Is there a reason for everybody fasting for 3 days? Is it just like a flash mob fast to show a political allegiance? Would people notice? What's going on?
So it's so all sorts of things could be going on, but there's, as you pointed out, there's a couple of different explanations that suggest themselves. One is that this is a super act of tshuva. This is really having the entire group of the Jews in Shushan, who are the only ones close enough to really get the decree, to be involved with saying, you know what, we must have messed up. This is our fault as well. This is not entirely on Mordecai. This is not entirely on Esther. All of us are involved in this. We all need to take stock, reflect, and repent for whatever it is that we've done that contributed to this situation. And that may then provoke God to forgive us and therefore to save us.
Mm.
There's also, as you pointed out, a sense of solidarity. That if Esther is willing to risk her life, willing to put herself on the line for this, then she expects the community to back her up and to be with her, at least in spirit, if not in body. And of course, fasting does kind of make it in body.
Mm.
So there's that sense of solidarity that is meant to help encourage and inspire her. That if she is going to act on behalf of her people, that she expects her people to act on behalf of her.
Is there anything written about why the maids also observe the fast? Because I'm assuming that the maidens would be less than interested in in whether all those Jewish people that live out there are going to get slaughtered. I mean,
but it's not necessarily clear that she told them why. And the fact is that, there's a couple things to consider. One is that they were probably her slaves, and therefore they didn't really get a say on whether they were going to fast or not.
Right.
And this is a little reminiscent of the king of Nineveh when he ordered that the animals as well be forced in order to create the right mood of repentance. But there's also, I think, a reason why the maids would be praying on behalf of Esther, which is if they know that she's about to go into the inner court without being summoned, they know that their mistress could die.
Right.
And if she dies, their status, their position as the handmaids of the queen is also going to be hit for six, I believe is the British expression.
Yeah.
That they're going to be knocked out of whatever status they have attained.
Okay. Great. All right. That's the end of chapter 4. Thank you guys for joining us at home. Thank you, Rabbi Neely, for leading us through this again.
Thank you, Jason.
And we'll see you all guys very soon. Give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you wait for a few seconds on the screen right now, there will be a link to Rabbi Neely's channel. You can find a ton of great videos over there. Go and check them out. And we'll see you all soon.